Hello everyone, my name is Pally, and I'm an OG 2016 DBD nerd who mains Trapper and Bill. Although, Bill may be in a bit of danger if Geralt of Rivia has anything to say about it, man I love his voice lines, and I also have an affinity for Singularity. But I gotta tell you, Springtrap was really fun in the PTB, so we'll have to see how long Singularity remains my side action if he remains fun after the PTB. And we'll also talk more about Springtrap in my next video, which I already have well in the works. Now today I'm going to be dropping some proverbial truth bombs and giving realistic, no-nonsense, and 100% unfiltered tips and truths in alternating order for new players who are starting to play DBD for the very first time. So strap in, because some of these, no one actually wants to be honest about them, and most don't even want to talk about them. I don't usually do videos like this, but I feel like everyone else's new player tips takes are all the same old tired nothing burgers over and over again. No one says anything different, they all just say the same thing, and because of that, I'll say what they won't say. And all of this will apply to both sides. Well, mostly. We're not playing any favorites here, so let's get into it. Tip number 1, don't build a reliance on perks. Now don't get it twisted, I'm not telling you not to run certain things, I'm not telling you what not to run, I'm just telling you don't build a reliance on things, and I will tell you why, because this applies to both killers and survivors. You'll find that a lot of the time, or rather 90% of the time, there is and will always be a meta. The meta in DBD dictates what perks, items, add-ons, and just general builds end up being popular at any given time. One thing you'll notice about the DBD meta is, as much as it can shift on both sides, it usually always remains the same for the most part. Killers run slowdowns and aura reading, and survivors run windows of opportunity and exhaustion. And I know that's an oversimplification, but I think those two things remain true even today. It could be argued that you don't even need perks. My friend Mr. Tatorhead plays both sides without perks and absolutely dominates most games, especially as Survivor. He does some amazing perkless Survivor looping guides, and I'll link his channel in the description below because I think this is something, regardless of if you use perks or not, everyone should watch these videos. He's just that good. Now think about this. What happens when you start using a perk or even a whole build and you get so used to using it every game that it gets to a point where it's basically base kit for you? But then one day it gets nerfed. Well, I'll tell you what usually happens. In fact, we can look at 2 instances from the past to see this in full force. Last year, when the Dungeons & Dragons chapter released for the anniversary, it came with sweeping nerfs to basically every strong killer slowdown perk in the game. And after that, while it made life more difficult for all killers, it really separated those who were actually good with those who were only good while stacking these perks. It separated those who had a good handle on both the micro and the macro of killer gameplay from those who wanted the macro to be handled for them more or less passively by these perks. And the same thing can be said for survivors if you go back even further to 2022 when the original Dead Hard was nerfed into the perk we more or less have now. When Dead Hard lost its dash and turned into an endurance perk, obviously we know now that it's a strong perk, but back then, because so many survivors had gotten so used to the dash version of Dead Hard, no cap, killer games were the easiest they had ever been, and we were facing the very same survivors. Because for a long time after that, survivors had no idea what to do without their E to outplay. They actually had counterplay to their perk now. And at the risk of getting a lot of hate for this, I would imagine that you'd see a repeat of this today if, for example, windows of opportunity or exhaustion were to see balance changes. The bottom line is you don't want to build a reliance on a specific set of perks, and this also applies to items or add-ons because whenever something gets nerfed, you're going to notice that you'll end up losing a lot more, and for most people that means they're having a lot less fun. I've seen a lot of people leave the game over stuff like this because of burnout. Now all of a sudden, this thing they really loved is gone and they're getting burnt out, which makes you wonder if they like DBD or they just like the broken stuff they could do with their perks. Regardless, the game won't feel as smooth or as fun to play as it once did if you build a reliance on certain things that end up getting changed in the future, and you'll have to get that feeling back, which isn't always fun. Those of you who are newer to the game may not understand completely, but those who have been around for a while will know exactly what I'm talking about. And that brings me to the first truth for new players. Meta perks are not the only good perks. Once again, this applies to both sides, but I will say that for killers versus survivors, what is and isn't meta works a bit differently because each individual killer has a different power, so there can be certain perks that are meta to one killer but not to others, but certain perks that are meta to all killers, whereas for survivors, they all collectively share the same meta, so it doesn't really matter. Now, much of the Dead by Daylight community, from social media to content creators, likes to regurgitate this rhetoric that somehow there is only a small pool of 10 or so good perks for either side, and that's the reason given for never running anything else. You'll see a lot of people in denial about this, but the fact is, unless something has near if not completely broken amounts of value, nobody really wants to run it. So in turn, new players will get told, well, level up these characters to get these perks and that's all you'll ever need. While in the same breath complaining about classes for 2v8, for example, because they lack build variety. And my answer to that comes in the form of a question: what variety are you talking about exactly? On top of all that, I can tell you that the notion that there's no other good perks is complete and total nonsense. Take survivors, for example. The meta is typically second chance or anti-tunnel with exhaustion and windows of opportunity. That's your average survivor build for the most part. Now, are there any perks necessarily better than those in terms of raw strength? Probably not. They are the strongest survivor perks in the game, and I'd argue probably even the strongest in the game period, but that doesn't mean there aren't a plethora of other good perks. Aftercare, Breakdown, Light-Footed, Pharmacy, Visionary, these are all examples of fantastic perks that, while they don't give you enormous amounts of free value, they're still great perks in their own right. And don't worry, because the same goes for killers. When it becomes a barrage of slowdowns and aura reading every game, sometimes you forget about decent perks like Gearhead, Hysteria, Surveillance, Enduring, or a perk I find to be hilariously slept on, Scourge Hook Monstrous Shrine, which if you do the math, can save a killer an entire generator worth of time. That's insane. Now look, I'm not the kind of guy that would ever tell you what to run or what not to run, and I'm very big on running whatever you want and playing however you want, but don't let other people fool you, and don't fool yourself into thinking that the meta is the only option, because it isn't. It will get stale very quickly. It often ends up being very boring for both sides in the long run. Tip number 2, don't take the game personally. One of the biggest problems in the Dead by Daylight community right now is how people take the game personally. Whether that be a loss or how a killer downed you, how a survivor looped you, the perks your opponents used, whatever the case, there's this overarching issue where a huge portion of casual players will take any one of those things and even more way too personally. I'll tell you a little bit of a story here. Literally just the other day, I was streaming as I do over on my Twitch channel at twitch.tv/PallyLive, wink wink, and during this stream, I queued up as Freddy for a killer request. I spawned in on Temple of Purgation, and the first person I find is a Steve with scene partner, a Steagle, if you will. So I chase him, down him at a loop fairly quickly, and very briefly gave him a quick nopers to signal that I heard his scene partner screaming, because in my mind, downing him just made the noise go away, and he immediately DC'd. Not only does he DC, he proceeds to come to my chat and tell me, F you and your nods, bitch. And what's really funny about it is, I didn't even nod like they said I did, I shook my head, but that's besides the point. He took it personally and had a tantrum and DC'd from the match, just to continue having said tantrum in my chat. Or if you want a more generic example of this, say you're playing killer and you have 2 gens left with only 2 hook states. It happens to all of us, from Odstarva to Hens to the super casual player. Nobody who plays killer is a stranger to this situation. And now, of course, the game isn't over until the survivors escape. So what do you do at this point if you want to try and win? Well, usually you tunnel someone out or soft camp someone to exploit the team's altruism. The issue is, nearly every time you do this, the survivors will take it insanely personal and think you're doing this in spite of them, when all you're doing is trying to clutch out a win. And they respond with some sort of wild amount of copium simply because they took you trying to win as an attack on them personally. And you know what? This isn't even just survivors. It applies to killers as well. We've all had moments as Survivor where you'll simply loop the killer for a decent amount of time, and when they finally get you, rather than picking you up and putting you on a hook, they'll proceed to spend the next 30 seconds WSing you on the ground because you just put a fat dent in their already fragile ego. And that really is the issue at the end of the day. People in this community tend to manifest extremely overinflated but fragile egos. So take it from me, when your opponent is trying to win and playing well, don't take it personally. Hell, I'll even say if you're going against people who are BMing you every turn, you still shouldn't take it personally, because the second you let that switch flip and start to take it personally, you're giving them exactly what they want. Even I have to remind myself of that sometimes, because it's not worth the energy. It's just a game, and the community would be a lot better off if they were better at remembering that. Dead by Daylight is going to throw a lot at you, and you'll feel a lot better and have way more fun in the long run if you just don't take it seriously. And that brings me to our second truth for new players. And that truth is, it doesn't matter what you do. This one's going to be fairly straightforward and short because there's not a lot that needs to be said. If you're a new Dead by Daylight player, you're probably wondering what I mean by this, but if you're a seasoned player that's been around a while, you'll probably know exactly what I'm talking about. What I'm saying is, whether you win or whether you lose, a lot of the time you're going to end up with some choice words from your opponent, either in in-game chat, DMs, whatever. Whether you played nice or whether you played ruthlessly to win, much of the time your opponent is going to have something negative to say about it or try to blame you for all their issues. We all know this to be true, and we've all experienced it if we've been here for a while. You've heard the phrase, you can't please everyone, right? But if you're new to the community, sometimes you're going to feel like no matter what you do, you can't please anyone. You could be the nicest player in the world, the most chill player in the world, you'll almost always end up with salt in some form, regardless, whether you're a killer or a survivor. And that brings me to the third and final tip for this video. It's okay to play to win. This is one that I would say applies more so to new killer players because it happens more so to killers than it does to survivors. And I'm not saying it can't happen on both sides, but at a systematic level, this is something that happens mostly to killer players. And don't worry, I will explain why. Since the very beginning in the Dead by Daylight community, there has been a mindset that killer players in general should hold back from exercising certain strategies that may hinder the fun of their opponents. This mindset started with the old honor code system back in the day, which, if you want to know more about that, I made a video talking about it called The Real Origins of Toxicity in Dead by Daylight a few months ago, and I'll link it in the description below. It started off innocent, but over time it turned into a systematic form of almost bullying in a way. Even today, it's widely accepted that survivor players can do more or less whatever they please, outside of cheating, of course, and the majority of people will be 100% okay with it, except for maybe the killers that have to deal with it. Survivors can pre-drop pallets, pre-run way before necessary to completely prevent an interactive chase, stack second chances, constantly run to boring loops like main building, which is honestly boring for both sides, and even use their supposed anti-tunnel perks offensively to force them on you whether you were tunneling or not. All of these things are mostly accepted as okay, and no one really bats an eye at it except for, like I said, the killers who have to deal with it at any given time. And honestly, this is fine. Play how you want. I have always said that. Though I may express how unfun something is at any given moment, I believe you should be able to play how you want, and I will never tell you not to, and nor should you let anyone else tell you not to. The real issue here comes from the fact that over time there has been a systematically created imaginary set of rules that is widely known as the Survivor Rulebook. They can do whatever they want, and no one really cares, and if you express any sort of discontent or displeasure with what they're doing, you're probably going to get told to just get good, regardless of the fact that a lot of the time it's not even about winning or losing, it's just about having fun. But here's the kicker, if you queue up as killer and you play with the same attitude they do, if you match that very same energy of just taking every single advantage you can and using every strategy to try and win regardless of how it affects your opponent's experience, you're the villain in their entitled little fanfic. They'll split up on generators, making it nearly impossible for more than half of the killer roster to apply pressure to it on most maps, which is arguably the most efficient thing they can do, but if you match that energy and play equally as efficient by eliminating someone or tunneling someone out early, as they say, you as the killer are the only one looked at in a negative light. They can pre-run way before necessary or pre-drop every pallet, which on most maps is a very easy way to waste the killer's time without any real skill whatsoever. But if you leave people slugged on the ground or you stack slowdown perks to combat this and get that pressure back, you'll get called sweaty, probably insulted, berated, and eventually you'll get the classic, "You won, so you're bad" response from survivors, as if they think that's some sort of gotcha and not a giant self-report on their part. You'll also be expected as killer to ignore mistakes that survivors make a lot of the time just for the sake of their fun, when there's never any regard given to your own gameplay experience. You'll be expected to put yourself at an intentional disadvantage for the sake of your opponent's experience when the energy is never matched from them. If you go back and watch my video called The Otsdarva Effect that I released a couple of months ago, you can see a Chucky game on Autohaven in the background where I tunneled one of the survivors out of the game as a result of the mistakes the survivors made, and every single person who mentioned it in the comments section completely ignored the survivors' terrible plays, such as healing under the hook in my terror radius, taking chase next to the hook, unhooking right in front of me before I even had a chance to leave, and tried to more or less gaslight me into thinking I did something wrong. And that's what you'll end up dealing with a lot of the time. Now keep in mind, I'm not saying this doesn't happen the other way around. I'm not saying that killers don't have their own rulebook for survivors. Many of them absolutely do, but on a systematic level, and in terms of the sheer number of survivors versus the number of killer players, it's not even close to being on the same level, and the vast majority of content creators tend to peddle the idea that you should feel bad as a killer for playing to win, but almost never express the same thing in reverse. However, at the end of the day, whether you're a killer or you're a survivor, being efficient and playing to win is okay. There's nothing wrong with it, and this just leads me to my third and final truth. There is only one set of rules in Dead by Daylight. You hear a lot about killer and survivor rulebooks in this community, regardless of the side you're playing. Playing for your opponent's fun, putting yourself in an intentional disadvantage, or being obligated to ignore blatant mistakes or misplays from your opponents for the sake of their fun. A lot of people will try to gaslight you into thinking that it's just good sportsmanship to follow these imaginary rules, and they'll even break out buzzwords like etiquette or respectful, and none of these rules are real rules. And not following them doesn't make you a bad person, it doesn't make you a piece of garbage, or any of the ad hominem nonsense you'll inevitably be gassed up with when you try to play this game. As a matter of fact, even Behavior Interactive themselves have gotten sick of these imaginary rules and has made a small list of things on their website that they completely ignore reports for because they aren't bannable and therefore are not real rules. And I'll link the full article directly on their website in the description below. Listen, the bottom line is you're not beholden to any rules besides the ones set by the developers of the video game themselves, and you're not a bad person if you choose to only follow those rules. If you want to play nice, play nice. If you want to play sweaty, play sweaty. If you want to meme around, then meme around. You paid for the game, you paid your cover charge. You can do as you please within the real rules of the game. Do not let the community pressure you into doing anything other than what you want to do, because I'm telling you that pressure will eventually build up, and believe me, it's hard to get that monkey off your back when it sits there. It sits on your back and turns into what is widely known as killer or survivor anxiety, which then eventually just makes you resent the game and not want to play it. Look, when it comes right down to it, just play how you want. There's not really much more to say other than that. I've seen a lot of X and X tips for new players videos come out specifically for the FNAF release happening tomorrow at the time of this publishing. And like I said before, most of them regurgitate the same stuff over and over that's been said for years now. So I wanted to stick to stuff that, while controversial, I do believe people need to know. Because let's be honest, getting into DBD isn't just a matter of how to play. It's also a matter of how to prepare. In any case, I want to thank you guys for joining me again. I apologize again for the upload schedule. I have my reasons, and I'll be completely open with you here, and I'll say that back in April, my family and I found out that my dad won't be around with us for too much longer. And I don't say this for sympathy. I say this because no matter the gap between videos, you guys just keep showing up, and I appreciate it more than you know. So thank you. Nobody wants to see me succeed at this more than he does, and if it helps, I've already gotten most of the material for the next video prepared. I just need FNAF to come out so I can finish it. So I can promise you it won't take as long for the next one. With all that being said, if you liked what you saw here today, please don't be afraid to hit that like and subscribe button if you think I'm worth a damn. And if you would like to catch me live, you can find me over on my Twitch channel at twitch.tv/PallyLive. This has been Pally. Thank you guys so much from the bottom of my heart, and I will see you in the next one.